2026 and it seems like every company wants to fleece you for a subscription fee when it comes to editing software, apart from one. I've been shooting and editing images for over 15 years now, and over that time I've used all the major editing software. But for the last few years, everything you've seen on this channel, every edit and every grade has been filtered through just one program, and that's DaVinci Resolve. So in this video, I kind of wanted to talk about why I switched, why it's become the software that I use for both my production business and for my content creation business. We're going to go through everything from my edit and color workflow, export settings, how I make use of the cloud features, and also talk about how this software has improved my workflow efficiency in my business, which has saved time and obviously money, but also how it's allowed me to create new revenue streams through digital products and selling power grades. So if you do any kind of professional editing work, or maybe you've just started using Resolve, then definitely stick around for this video. The biggest attraction to me, and probably for most people, is going to be the color suite that you get in Resolve. It is industry leading, second to none, and it's just unrivaled compared to Final Cut and Premiere. Once I began to dig around within the color page, I realized very quickly how much I'd been missing out by using those other programs. And I'm not going to lie, that node structure in Resolve can look super complicated and intimidating, but it's really not. All you have to think about it is it's just a pipe, and the image flows from one end to the next, and each node is just a point in that pipe network where you're going to do something to the flow of the image or the water through it. So you might change the color of it, you might change the temperature of it. And each node basically is adding to what you added previously, and you just have a chain of effects going from one end to the next. At first, all I wanted to do was just sort of take the digital edge off my footage, make it look a little bit more organic, three-dimensional, make it look less flat, add a bit of texture and grain to it. I just started off by plowing through color grading tutorials. There are millions of great channels out there that share their workflows and how they achieve different looks. And I basically just began copying those over onto my work, or amalgamating them or modifying them until I got where I wanted to go. My first graded project, I think it was called Following the Breath. I really wanted a grungy organic look, and that just came about from a modified power grade from a Quasi video. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But it was a million miles away from what I could ever have hoped to have achieved in something like Final Cut 10, and it just transformed the project. For the first time, the color work was becoming integral to the feel and vibe of the finished project. I think the next best thing you can do is just buy someone else's power grade, and this will give you a pre-configured node structure, a pre-designed look that you can experiment with stuff already dialed in, and I think that will really help you understand and gain some confidence in how Resolve works under the hood. Whenever you do a grade, you can save this out as a power grade file, and you can keep this for a future project, you can share them, or you can even sell them. So I did this. I bought Sir's original Film Vision power grade. He's advanced it to Film Vision Pro now. It's fantastic. I recommend looking into it. But this gave me this huge node structure, and obviously it produced a really lovely look, a really organic look. But just looking at all the different elements, the different settings, understanding what happened then if I tweaked them or added in my own elements, began to sort of help me gain confidence in playing around in Resolve and not necessarily having to start from an empty page, and having something there that I could edit and work with. And eventually you'll just get to a point where you're confident enough to start your own power grades. You have an idea of what your image should look like, and you know how to get from A to Z on your own. Resolve has a central library that is available between projects. You can very easily generate your own LUTs. And eventually you'll just have this whole library of your own power grades, to the point where you might even want to share these with other people. These are the color settings that I tend to use for most projects. I don't use the color managed workflow. And to move my footage from log into Rec 709, I'll generally use a color space transform. A color space transform, or CST, is one of the most fundamental tools on the color page of Resolve. It allows you to move your footage from one color space to another, hence the name. I can't possibly explain the full lowdown on what a color space is in this quick video, but in essence, think of a color space like an area or a container that can hold a specific volume or range of colors. Some are larger, some are smaller, so their specific shape will determine what they can store. So for example, when you're capturing in log on your camera, you may be capturing in a relatively large color space, but when it comes to export your graded file, you're probably going to output it in a standard known as Rec 709, which is a much more limited color space designed to be viewed on monitors and screens. So the CST effectively allows you to accurately transform your camera's color space into one appropriate for viewing on monitors. And generally you would place the color space transform at the end of your node structure and do the bulk of your work underneath it, because that's going to be a larger color space and it's going to give you more information and room to move your image about. Once you move it into Rec 709, you're dealing with a much smaller color space, so you'll have much less information to play with. There are so many effects and tools in the color page, and Blackmagic seems to add to these on an almost monthly basis. Whereas in other programs, I would find myself purchasing plugins or external tools, I don't need to do that with Resolve. And it has more than I could possibly mention in this video, but some of my highlights include the excellent Film Look Creator, which is basically like a simplified version of Dehancer, and I'm sure Blackmagic are going to improve upon this over the years to come. The Color Density tool has been a great recent addition. Excellent tracking and AI masking tools, the depth map, which is fantastic. It allows you to adjust elements of the foreground or background. The recent inclusion of the haze tool, which allows you to add realistic haze into your shots, as well as a huge range of amazing effects like grain, halation, and glow. I think by far the biggest reason you'd want to consider switching to Resolve is going to be the price, right? It just offers incredible value for the money. Premiere Pro, after 1 year, it's going to cost you more than Resolve. And if you use it, say, just for 3 years, it's going to be close to £800, which is over $1,000. Now, that just means the more you use Premiere, the more expensive it gets. You're always on the hook of it. And I think these subscription models particularly penalize people starting out at the lower end of the industry, where they're not going to be working all the time, they're not going to be charging as much, so these expenses really rack up and they really eat into their bottom line. Even if you have a bigger business, it's not the biggest cost, you might say, but me personally, I would far rather have that money to invest and save and get a return on it and just throw money away every month. And if you're on holiday or you have a break or something, and you have an annual contract, then you're locked into that contract. Adobe do not make it easy to break that subscription. And even if you do give up the subscription, if a client comes back to you, as they do, and they want you to amend a project you worked on 1-2 years ago, you then have to repay for Premiere to reopen that project, which again is just frustrating, would be a cost that I would then have to pass on to my client or suck up myself. So I've had to re-record this section because just as I was about to put the video out, Apple has announced that they too are going to be switching to a subscription model. Now you can still pay for Final Cut Pro, it's around £300. But what I can see happening is they're going to want to shift people over to that subscription model, probably by withdrawing support from the paid app and only providing updates to people on a subscription-based service, forcing you to move over to a paid monthly subscription. Final Cut was my main piece of editing software for years, but I ended up just getting a bit disillusioned and frustrated with it because it really was bottlenecking what I could do in my professional work. Apple just failed to add new features or update it. The fact, that it forced me to buy another piece of software, Compressor, if I wanted any control over my export settings. It lacked basic auto subtitling or transcription features, AI mastering tools, the color grading tools were rudimentary, and Resolve was very affordable, it was there, and eventually I made the jump. If you spend enough time in any editing software, then you'll probably develop enough muscle memory with keyboard shortcuts to cut a project with your eyes closed. And for most people, this is probably going to be one of the biggest psychological barriers to switching to something new. You've got to relearn all of that, break out of old habits and learn new ones. Thankfully, Resolve allows you to customize your keyboard shortcuts and already comes with several presets from other popular software. So if you're hardwired to deal with Premiere or Final Cut or even Avid, then those presets exist already. I edit mostly doc and interview-based work in my production company, and then obviously on the side, I, on a weekly basis, also cut my YouTube videos, but also lots of social media content as well. So I'm working with, long form, short form, all kinds of resolutions, and Resolve handles it all fantastically. For me, one of the biggest things that just pushed me away from Final Cut 10 was the lack of stuff like audio transcription. Made me work more and more in Premiere, and I really didn't like working in Premiere. When Resolve got the transcription features, that was the thing that just 100% locked me into Resolve, and I just sort of left all the other software behind. I think understanding how Resolve treats projects is the first thing to get your head around. So it uses a database system. Now you can run that either locally on your hard drive, or if you pay additionally, you can use cloud databases and sync it all to the cloud, which is what I do now, but I started using local databases. Basically, the database is where all of your different projects sit. And so you create a new project, and then within that project is the thing where all your sort of footage, media, timelines, and assets. And obviously you can hot swap between different open projects, and then within a project, you can have multiple timelines open at the same time. You can obviously customize the workspace. All my media I organize manually outside of Resolve, and then I drag it into Resolve. And within Resolve, we'll see the different pages or tabs that you have. You have media. I never use this, but this is the pane which you can go in to help organize and keep tabs on all your media. Then you have the cut page. Again, I don't tend to use this, but this is like a streamlined editing panel that is more similar to how Final Cut 10's magnetic timeline works. I prefer just to go straight in and cut with the main edit page. And that's probably where you're going to spend most of your life, cutting in there. This is probably more similar to something like Premiere Pro than it is Final Cut. Then you have Fusion. This is not something I use a lot, but this is where you can create and customize effects. And then you have Color, which is your node-based coloring system. And then you have Fairlight, which is Resolve's pretty powerful audio mastering and mixing panel. And then you have the Deliver tab, and this is where you're going to go when you want to finish and finalize a project and export it. In terms of organize everything in my project, this is my sort of basic folder structure. So I tend to organize stuff out into folders. So I'll have stuff like timelines. If I have separate social cuts, they'll go in a separate folder. If I have old timelines and edits, then I will move those over to an old folder and keep it all nice and tidy. I tend to copy out a new timeline at the beginning of every day. Footage goes into a footage folder, and then I'll separate that out depending on sort of what works best. Maybe that's like on a day-by-day basis, and then I'll maybe separate out into cameras, or maybe it'll be like, if we're doing different interviews with different people, maybe it'll be separated out that way. When it comes to exporting, these are my export settings. I get asked about it a lot. Feel free to screenshot it and use it on your own projects. But generally, I export for web as a high quality 10-bit H.265 file between 45 and 60,000 kilobits per second. And then if it's going on socials, I might just drop the bitrate a bit, maybe to like 20 to 30,000 kilobits per second. Then for client work or important projects, I'd also probably export a master ProRes file, maybe something without graphics or music included, or separate audio tracks. I enable live saves, which basically just saves the project file every time you make a change. And I also have automatic backups running regularly, but I also sync my projects with DaVinci Cloud, which also provides an extra layer of redundancy. Moving over to Resolve was pretty pain-free. There was a bit of a learning curve. I wouldn't say it was the steepest in the world. So I started by grading projects, so still cutting in Final Cut or Premiere and then bring them in grading. And then eventually I started to try and bring my whole editing workflow over it as well. What helped me at first was basically just cutting a few personal projects in Resolve. And then moving my YouTube workflow over, stuff that wasn't super deadline dependent, wasn't high risk. And then eventually that process just got me faster and faster and more confident with it. Maybe after a month or two, I moved over my professional workflow. So it was a relatively quick and pain-free process to get my professional workflow into Resolve. One of the other things I didn't really expect when I first moved to Resolve was that I would eventually end up working with the cloud workflow, and that's what I do now. So rather than storing everything locally, my media is stored locally, but all my project files are saved and synced to the BlackMagic Cloud. So I sometimes work across multiple machines and also an iPad. So having synced projects that can really easily be accessed from these multiple devices is just fantastic. Secondly, I love the redundancy that this provides. Obviously, I'm doing backups, so just having this additional backup that is a cloud backup means that if my computer goes down, I don't have to mess around restoring any projects or any of those extra steps. Like, it's just there. I just log into another computer with Resolve on it, and the project's just sitting waiting for me to use. Finally, something that I started dipping my toe into over the last year in my production business is using the cloud features on Resolve to work remotely with other editors. With this, it's really simple. I really love it. It's really cost effective as well. I can hand over the project file to them very quickly with some low quality proxies, which are good enough for editing on. Don't need to send them the high quality footage. They can turn around edits, and then I can just quickly access that same edit project when they're finished and do the final export or color work or whatever. Or another way is that they can get editing straight away on the proxies, and then we can take as long as we want to send over the original source material, either via a slower upload or just currying a drive over to them. And then they don't have to wait for that to get started. You're not losing that time. So Resolve also has an iPad version. It is a separate fee, but again, it's pretty reasonable given that you're pretty much getting the full program on your iPad or Mac or iOS. It is a little bit locked down at face value, but if you're using a mouse and a keyboard, people have found a way to unlock the other tabs. And I imagine as they support and upgrade this app and as iPads become more powerful, those additional tabs will come by default. And it's really powerful with the cloud tool. So if you want to cut a project on your computer and then go away and develop a power grade using your tablet, you can do that. There's something particularly cool and relaxing about color grading on an iPad and listening to music. In fact, Palermo, my first digital product, that was created on an iPad. I had a 3-hour flight and I was going to Palermo, and I started building a power grade for DJI D-Log-M footage. And over the course of that week, I was able to create the basis of a new power grade, which when I got home, I could develop and perfect into my first digital product. And the amount I've earned from those has more than covered the time that went into making them, and also the cost of Resolve itself, like way more. You just basically save your power grade as a still, and then it's very easy to export that. And the same for LUTs as well. And you can even generate VLT LUTs, which are LUTs that can be used inside Lumix cameras, so people can bake the LUT in and skip having to apply it in post, which is fantastic, or just use it as a monitoring LUT. Just bear in mind, if you are wanting to make and share LUTs, that the LUT file itself only stores color information, and it won't sort of store stuff like masks, vignettes, or other effects like grain or bloom. Look, at the end of the day, you should use whatever editing software you're most comfortable with. But I would genuinely say that DaVinci Resolve has had more of an impact on my work than buying any other piece of kit, camera, lens, or lighting equipment. If anything, it's allowed me to really extract the full potential of that kit through its coloring tools. And ultimately, I wish I'd switched to Resolve years earlier rather than putting it off because I thought it would be too time-consuming and complicated. And I think now is one of the best times to consider switching to Resolve, considering Apple has just announced that it too will be moving over to a subscription service. If you are still on the fence about switching to Resolve, then there is the free version that you can download and try. Perfectly capable, you can cut projects in it, you can grade projects in it. It only holds back some of the more advanced features and settings, and there's more than enough there to dip your toe in and get a feel for it. So I hope sharing my experience in switching to Resolve is helpful. If you've made the switch or transition, I'd really love to know if you've got any tips that might help other people considering it. Drop it in the comments down below. And if you want to see any specific Resolve tutorials from me in the future, also just give me a shout down in the comments. Thanks again to BlackMagic for sponsoring this video. My name's Ed, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya.